My name's Jeff. I know most everyone here. I'm the executive director of Zen Peacemakers, and I really first want to appreciate Roshi Ken and Chris Panos, whose idea this program was and is, and who did the legwork to put this together. So thank you too for doing this. And I want to remind everyone also. This is two parts. We will meet again in 2 weeks on November 4th for the second half of this program. Today's program is focused on Bernie at Zen Center of LA, and in 2 weeks we'll invite in our clown contingent and talk about Bernie the Clown. So. And this will be with Mr. Yuhu and Michelle No Can Do Dobbs. So be sure to mark your calendar and come see us again in 2 weeks. Without taking up any more time, let's step right into this. We're gonna hear from our friends Roshi Seisen Saunders and Roshi Paul Genki Kahn about their time with Bernie at ZCLA, and I imagine we're gonna have plenty of time for comments and questions and answers. We scheduled this for an hour and a half, so I think we'll have a nice time here today. So once again, thanks everyone for coming. And if you're on, I see more names than I see images. So a lot of people have cameras off. If you're comfortable turning on your video, it's really nice to be able to see smiling faces, and a lot of you will recognize one another, and some have not seen one another for a very long time. So welcome everyone. And with that, Seisen, I'm going to hand the talking stick to you in Mexico, and I'll mute myself, and we can get started here.
Hi everyone. My goodness, I haven't seen Brenda for so many years. It's wonderful to see you. It's just wonderful to see everyone. And yes, thank you so much to Ken and Chris and Jeff and the Peacemaker Order. So happy to see it going so well. And I just feel moved to say something about the terrible things going on right now with Israel and Palestine, particularly thinking about Bernie, who gave so much for peace in that area. And you never know how those little seeds will manifest, but certainly right now it's terrible tragedy. So just I'm sure we're all sending our love to the folks involved in that. I guess all of us are involved in that. So I had stuff to say, and it was kind of little intimate stories about Bernie. He was actually I only knew him at ZCLA for 4 years. I found out from Wikipedia, if Wikipedia is correct. He had transmission in 1976 and he left ZCLA in 1980. So that's 4 years that I knew him, because I was at the session that his transmission was announced. Maizumi Roshi, and I can still see them. It was such a big moment for me, was sitting right next to Tetsugen. And he said, I'm going to give transmission to Tetsugen. And it was such a huge thing for me, because, I had such an idea of enlightenment, which I think all of us may have had. And I knew Maizumi Roshi was enlightened, but that a Westerner would receive transmission was so huge for me. And I remember what he said. He said, he's empty now, but I'm just going to hang a few ornaments before doing the ceremony. And I still don't know what he meant by that. what those ornaments were. I wish he was alive to ask him. And at that time, those of you who were there know that Bernie was a very dedicated priest. He was on some level committed to the hierarchy. There's one story which I told him, and he was ashamed of it, but I'll tell it again. On the Ryoban, when we line up for the altar, nowadays, at least at Sweetwater Zen Center, it's like everybody just takes a seat. But in the old days, there's a hierarchy, and depending on your seniority was where you stood close to the altar. And Tetsugin's spot was it was like what would have been be Roshi's spot, but if he wasn't there, closest to the altar. And some new guy, kind of a hippie guy, just thought that looks like a good spot and wandered up there. And Tetsugen went up to him and just elbowed him off the seat. Bam. I was like, whoa. And I told Bernie, I said, oh, I can't believe I did that. But he was into it. He was very serious priest and traditional, very traditional practicing priest. But the thing that happened to me then, I was going to have a few more little stories, but last night I dreamed about the Padma house, which some of you remember the Padma house, which was Bernie's vision. And the thing that I think, there's many things that changed about Bernie, one of them being the social action change, which happened, that experience happened after he left ZCLA, but at the time, his vision was this huge Zen community, the huge number of people living together and practicing together and practicing the way. And part of that vision was buying all this property at ZCLA, which he did. The Padma was this huge, horrible apartment house that we all went into and painted. Oh, it was awful. Painted and fixed up, and I don't know how many properties he bought. I remember I went to Daison once. I didn't work with him a lot during that time, but I went to Daison. I was in charge of the sewing room, sewing zafus and stuff like that. And I was very overwhelmed. I was just beside myself with being overwhelmed. And I went in to complain, and he said to me, well, how about, I said, I need a sewing machine. I need a professional sewing machine. And he said, how about if we get 10 sewing machines and 20 people and I was just like, I just laughed and I never talked to him again. But that was that visioning aspect of Bernie, which was definitely happening at that time. It hadn't obviously matured to when it became more the bearing witness and social action. I think that I got that dream about the Padma house because Bernie wanted me to make sure and explain that vision. And it was working at the time. It didn't, as many of you know, it fell apart, partly because of Maizumi Roshi's difficulties with alcoholism and boundaries, and partly because of that big recession. And so then ZCLA went back to being a small community, or smaller community, but ZCLA continues to thrive. And I think Bernie's vision, of course, is a huge part of that, along with Maizumi Roshi's. So that's all I have to say, my little memories. Yeah, I'm sorry, Brenda Chiko, I guess, isn't able to be here, and I am sorry you're not gonna get to hear her, because she lived with Bernie for quite a while when he was at ZCLA, and I'm sure she has a lot of stories about that time that would be nice to hear. Maybe some other time.
Thank you, Seisen. Wonderful. Thanks so much. Um, let's go ahead and hear from Genki, and then we can open up for comments and questions. Genki, do you want to go ahead and unmute and share with us? There. Oh, not yet. Yeah, you're still muted, Genki.
I'm much better muted, frankly, but yeah, I wondered if Brenda would like to say a few words. She actually was at ZCLA before I came. So Brenda, would you say a few things about the atmosphere and about your life there?
I would be glad to, because Bernie and his first wife and Gempel and I were really best friends, and it was the first time we as a couple met another couple that we really got along with, and that made it super special. The first time I met Bernie, I was with Joshin Althaus, and we were trying to blaze a trail in Santa Barbara. Maizumi was away in Japan trying to raise money at the time. And I met Bernie and his wife and his two kids. And his son was still a baby and had a fever, but he was going to do it anyway. And we are all out there in Santa Barbara trying to create a trail. I mean, literally, there was no trail, but he wanted to create a trail so that he could show it to Roshi when he came back, and have Roshi buy this land and have, it was way before Mountain Center was even an idea. And that's the first time I met him. He was determined, Bernie was, and brought his whole family, and just, anyway, it was crazy because the baby had a fever, and Helen was carrying him, Marky, and it was kind of cuckoo crazy. Why are we doing this? And then Roshi came back, and he wanted nothing to do with this land in Santa Barbara. So Roshi just, Roshi, Maizumi Roshi was a man who gave you enough rope to hang yourself. I don't know if you remember that about him, but I really felt that. He never said no, but he also gave you enough rope to hang yourself. And what Seisen said about the vision, I think that vision came with Bernie from the idea of the kibbutz in Israel. He understood the kibbutz, and he wanted to create that, and he did. And we owned the ZCLA at one time owned, I think, almost 75% of all the properties on one whole city block. And we had at least 90 people living there full time. And then people would come in and do sessions, and it was a little community. And I remember never thinking I would ever live in LA, but because there was this little village, and you inevitably, just walking through the backyards, inevitably you would meet somebody you knew, and you could talk. And as I had my first child there, and it was, and now I watch my children have children, and I just think, how did they do it? Not having family or created family right there, because it's so lonely as a young mother with your baby, and you can't do anything, and you're up to your ears in everything in work, and so it was a really amazing time to raise my child, and as I see my own kids struggle, I realize that. I remember when I had a colicky baby, so he cried regularly. We could set the clock to it from 4 to 7 every day, and there was nothing we could do and he grew out of it. But it was just, I remember being frustrated because there was nothing I could do to soothe him, and so I would take him along Irolo at 4 o'clock peak rush hour because it was so noisy. I couldn't hear him screaming in the stroller, and I just push him on Irolo Drive because, and so there were other times when I'd be lonely, and I'd take him outside and feed him, and someone would come up and say hi, and it was an amazing time. For me, I felt so supported, not to mention there were a lot of students who, oh, can I help? Yes, please take the baby. It was just, I don't know how mothers do it without that. I knew how hard it was, but there was this real community, not to mention we knew we had a doctor nearby. We knew we had fix-it people. I was not married to a fix-it person at all. And so it was wonderful to have all that support. So it was a real village, and frankly, it was wonderful. I know it fell apart, and maybe it wasn't supposed to last forever, but it was really a wonderful thing. And you didn't get along with everybody, but you cared about each other. And that's about it.
Thank you, Brenda. Genki, back to you.
Well, thank you. It's nice to have a chance to honor Bernie. He and I were very close and had a very difficult relationship. I certainly learned more from him than I did from Maizumi in our many years together. And in many ways, I wanted him to be a father to me, and he wanted me to be a son. And I like to say neither of us were very good at those roles. It wasn't easy. I was at the Diamond Sangha in Hawaii for 2 years, from 70 to the end of 71. And I heard about the first Ango at ZCLA because one of our regulars there in Hawaii with Aiken Roshi came and did the 3 months. And it was really intense. And I think it was three week-long retreats, sitting morning and evening and noon services. And Maizumi Roshi was ordaining people. The Diamond Sangha was a lay community and very serious. Yamada Roshi and Yasutani Roshi would come for retreats. Unfortunately, Yasutani died the year I arrived there, and he was due in 2 weeks to run a retreat, and he died 2 weeks before that. So Yamada came. I sat 2 session with Yamada Roshi there. But I wanted to make my life Zen. I was actually on my way to Japan when I stopped in Hawaii for the conference of the American Humanistic Society and the Transpersonal Psychotherapists in 1970. Yeah, in the middle of the Vietnam War. We were actually kicked out of our hotel, the conference people, because Kissinger was meeting with General Key. And I was part of a die-in with Red Paint for Blood. And one of my claims to fame is that Dan Rather delicately stepped over my body and ignored me during that die-in protest. anyway, it was a lay group, and I didn't see a future in what was happening in Hawaii. Robert Aiken was a wonderful war protester and very caring person, very, very serious, and had struggled enormously to learn Zen and practice Zen. But it sounded like there was a possibility for a lifelong future in Zen at Zen Center Los Angeles. So I hadn't seen my family on the mainland for a couple of years, so I went back and visited them and stopped at ZCLA and never left. I had asked Aiken Roshi to contact Maezumi and say that I was coming and ask his permission to visit him. I was a little more formal in those days. And I'd had that agreement. And I arrived there and people were very nice. Someone offered to, Sotetsu let me stay in his apartment, just banking on the floor there. And the people were very welcoming. It was, a fairly substantial group even at that point, living there and practicing there. And people were serious. And I banged into Maezumi Roshi in the kitchen, coming into the kitchen. And practically literally banged into him. He was coming in the door. I was trying to go out the door of the kitchen. And he just had such animal energy. I don't know how to describe it, but just was so alive and intense and laughing almost. Just very present. I was starstruck. And he said, "Oh, so you're Paul Kahn." I said, "Yes." He said, "We're supposed to meet." I said, "Yes." And I couldn't say much more. He said, "I don't think we need to meet." I said, "Yes." So I didn't meet Maezumi personally for a couple of days. But Bernie contacted me and asked me to dinner. He had heard that I was coming and that I'd been a serious student out in Hawaii, and he was looking for serious students. But he was very concerned. He said, sort of beating around the bush, this odd comment. He said, "Well, you were with Aiken Roshi." I said, "Yeah, I was with Aiken, yes." You've got to be careful when, Zen people ask you questions. You don't know where they're coming from. Is this Dharma combat? What's going on here? Where are you coming from? Watch out. He said, "Well, Aiken's a very moral man, isn't he?" Well, I said, yes. Robert Aiken's fabulous. He's defending people from a Christian group, I can't remember the name now, that threw blood on draft records and were being, arrested and sent to jail. And he wouldn't pay taxes. He wouldn't pay his defense taxes and other things. So, and he kept asking me questions about what I thought about being moral, and made me very nervous. I wasn't the most moral person in the world. Anyway, it was odd, but I gradually, as I got to know what was going on at ZCLA, a kind of bifurcated reality that we really played hard and worked hard. And it's hard to really describe that moment in time because it was the 60s. It was the ending of the 60s. And there was all this social revolution and sexual revolution and psychedelic revolution. And it was all mixed up. I'd been a rock musician. I started recording at 16. Anyway, it was all mixed up, but there was a passion and a faith in the practice and in what this all meant. And willingness to sacrifice lives and careers and sadly children to do this practice. It was very intense. Bernie at that time was really the senior student and the guiding light. He was the head of the board of directors, I believe. But definitely there was a vision cooking. At that time, the vision kind of combined a commune, not just a kibbutz. We might have done better with the kibbutz model, but it was a combined hippie commune with a kibbutz commune and a Japanese monastery, if you can get that brew. It's quite a cocktail. And there were stories, Roshi's drinking and carousing. I, at first, didn't relate to him on that level. Didn't get involved at first in that. But there were stories how his ex-wife had taken a gun and put it to his head and threatened him. She was going to shoot him. And I don't know if Daishin or Dario told me this story, but he just took another drink and looked at her. And she finally left with the gun. He had an amazing power of presence, no matter what. But Bernie was very serious and not involved at all. Bernie didn't drink. Bernie wouldn't be at those parties and didn't want to be any part of that. And he really made kind of the discipline of the place, made it happen. And the vision of expanding this to become what they wanted was a major center that would be from monastic education and really serious practice and realization, and have an influence in America. We were attracting incredible people, writers like Peter Matheson, or a poet like W.S. Merwin, and scholars, not only Peter Gregory, but many other scholars and thinkers, luminaries. It was such an exciting time just to meet the people coming through. And our practice was daily practice. It didn't matter if you were up till 4 in the morning partying, but you were there at 6 a.m. Zazen. That was no nonsense. And there was morning Zazen for an hour and a half, 2 40-minute sittings every morning, and then evening sitting, 2 40-minute sittings. During Ongo times, there would be 30-minute sitting and a noon service. So it was very serious. At that time, Bernie was sort of well known for having the most powerful enlightenment of any Westerner. And that was said by people like Yasutani and Koryu Roshi. It wasn't just gossip. So we kind of looked at him with a certain amount of awe. And at the same time, Maizumi loved to create competition between people. He felt that was rich and he would call it rubbing stones. That if stones knocked together, they became smooth, but he had to knock them together, and he'd bait people. He'd try and work on your vanity and your envy and your ambition. And, don't you have ambition? And what, you have too much ambition? It's just, what is this? What is this, Genki? Just nonstop. He was always whamming you away. So there was, like, between all of us, I was competing with Bernie, I was competing with Genpo. I missed so much that I could have learned if I could have shut up and not tried to be the smartest guy in the room. Anyway, there was a lot of competition and not always comfortable. Bernie at that time was working at McDonnell Douglas. He was a brilliant mathematician, and he was programming the first Mars flyby. So every morning after morning Zazen, this guy would pick him up and drive him to McDonnell Douglas. And he'd complain to me how the guy liked to talk. He'd want to keep his Zazen going, but it was impossible. He and Helen would have Shabbat dinners. So they were, Helen came from a very conservative Jewish background. There was a lot of problems with her family, her father. who didn't approve of Bernie and what they were involved in. Helen herself was at that time really not wanting to be part of the Zen Center, and didn't. After a while, she was in Jungian therapy and doing Tai Chi, and there was a lot of tension in the house. At a certain point, when we bought more property, I moved in with them for several years as his jisha. I'd been Maizumi's jisha until Larry Christensen, Jisen, took over being Maizumi's jisha, and I became Bernie's jisha. But Bernie was always creating things, a publishing company, Center Publications. For a while, I was director of that, and we were publishing Zen books, and then we started, of course, expanding. Finally, the thing collapsed when we moved to trying to do a cookbook. You know, there had been that very successful Greens cookbook at San Francisco, but I got involved with some hardcore cooking people, and we were going to try and publish one of their books, but our distribution stank, so we weren't selling enough. So it was a real problem. But we published Ken Wellwood's first book, and I think who's a big integral person? Does anybody remember the guy who does integral this, integral that? Oh boy, am I aged out here?
Ken Wilber?
All right, yeah, not Ken Wilber. Oh boy, anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, we were publishing a lot of stuff. We owned, I thought it was even more than 75% of that whole block, right near the Ambassador Hotel. I mean, prime real estate in LA. Bernie did that, raising money and imparting a vision to people. So they wanted to give money and help. He retired from McDonnell Douglas because he wanted to do Zen full time. And at that point, he created an organizational chart. One of the things about Bernie and being a mathematician, he's a structure person. Well, the shit hit the fan. The early people, there was a big contingent of hippies in the early contingent of Zen that wanted anything but bureaucracy and organization and enforced discipline and rules. And this chart had everybody working for somebody else. And one of the ways they did things in those days at ZCLA is they'd find the person you had the most trouble with and the person you most disliked and put you under them. So I ended up working for Helen Glassman. We did not get along well. I had a very strong mother, and Helen was a strong personality. And she was a wonderful person. I was an asshole. But anyway, we had a rough time, and we were living together. And so I was supposed to work for her. But that's the way it was. There's a lot of ego busting. A lot of work on that. Let's see. Bernie was a very tough teacher with Mu, working with people. I had luckily passed with Yamada Roshi before I came, so I was doing my koan study with Maizumi. Maizumi would not really give you anything. Sometimes I wouldn't even know if I passed a koan or why I passed it. It was one of those kind of very Asian lessons that you have to find your confidence. You have to be sure yourself. You don't get reassurance. And it was uncomfortable and tough. Bernie was going to the Japanese portion of LA and playing Go. I don't know if you know Go. It makes chess look like amateur hour. It's this incredibly interstices board where you try and encircle the pieces of your opponent. Now, I tell you, Bernie's strategy for life was based in that game. Whatever he was doing, he found the next bigger container. So when one organization didn't work or didn't want him to be head of it, then he created something a little bigger, not just Zen, but the Zen peacemakers. You could have Sufis, you could have Hindus, you could have Hasidics. The container. Those little beads were going on that board round and round and circling everything in the universe. It was the end suite that has no inside and no outside, and that was the problem. As gorgeous as that visionary is, he could get tired of running things pretty quickly. But he had great ideas, one of the most creative forces in Zen to this day. In those days, though, Bernie had nothing to do with social service, let me tell you. And Maezumi, coming out of World War II, and the way politics played into Buddhism, and we didn't know it, but that Harada and Yasutani had been big supporters of Japanese expansionism, Japanese exceptionalism, Japanese colonialism, writing books, giving speeches, encouraging kamikaze pilots. We had no idea of that in those days. It wasn't talked about either, but Maezumi wanted nothing to do with politics. So the anti-Vietnam things that were going on then, wanted no part of that. And social service was not supported. I got involved with working in the camps where the Vietnamese were moved outside of LA when our mission in Vietnam collapsed. But I got a lot of hell for that and some other things. So those days, it was more as Brenda was saying about building this really impressive place where more and more people could come and interrelate. But there was an interfaith element. Bernie's interest, not actually, it was Helen's, that was more pushing Bernie in some ways with her conservative Judaism anyway, they met Don Singer, the hippie rabbi, who was just a wonderful force. And so they started having some lectures of him and bringing him in, and they would celebrate things like the Day of Atonement. And at the end of the Day of Atonement, I don't remember too much about Judaism, but there was another day where you would get to eat and celebrate. And so we'd go through this weekend. There was a Day of Atonement, and then I guess a Day of Unatonement. And you would dance. And so a sight of Maezumi in his robes, dancing with Don Singer and Bernie, it was something else. But that was the beginning of the manifestation, at least visible manifestation, of the kind of interfaith mania that would continue. Lex Hickson, that's for your next meeting, but Lex Hickson was a big part of promoting that when we moved to New York. Dido and Bernie and I moved to New York. We used to go to Zenshuji, which was the headquarters in the Western world of Soto Zen. And Bernie had actually met Maezumi at Zenshuji and helped him start the ZCLA as a separate place and make the transition out of being a priest trapped in that Soto system. Maezumi was not happy in it. He really himself, as a young man, had been very driven. He'd had polio as a young man. And certain things in his life had made him very driven to want to achieve awakening and enlightenment. So the sort of school's involvement with ritual and the death rituals and sort of all of that expensive stuff was not of his interest. So Bernie was doing Zazen at Zenshuji with him. And I remember Bernie telling me how he was curious. He said to Maezumi, what do you do when you're doing this silent walking, this kinhin thing? What do you do? And Maezumi looked at him and smiled and said, we walk. At Zenshuji at New Year's, we would do this thing. The Prajnaparamita texts, every temple has to have one of these collections, and they're like accordions, but they get dusty. So once a year at New Year's, they make big pots of rice and rice cakes, and you chant the Prajnaparamita Sutra while you open these accordion books, 1,000 of them, right? One at a time, you're opening them and you say, and you're sort of just opening them like an accordion and closing them to get the dust off them. And then you put them back in their slots. And it's done, of course, in Japanese style at 90 miles an hour, like cleaning one of these monasteries. So, and people are just howling the Heart Sutra in Japanese. And that used to be great fun. So Bernie and Genpo and the other priests, we'd all go over there and celebrate, and then sake and rice cakes after cleaning up the Prajnaparamita texts that are supposed to be so empty. All 1,000 copies of them. 1,000 chapters of them. Bernie could be very patient, very kind. I remember he was really put through the ringer for his Dharma succession. He did the whole thing in a week in the old style, where you both become the full priest and get Dharma succession. You do Denbo and Denkai in the same week, and you do all the charts, and you have to do 10,000 bows. And it was a very intense time in the middle of a retreat, a week-long retreat. And he worked very hard. And as Seisen said, it was really, really an incredible moment. To feel that he had a legitimate enlightenment that was really verified by 3, people we totally believed in as great Zen masters, Yasutani Roshi, Koryu Roshi, and Maizumi Roshi, and that he was becoming a fully empowered teacher. It was a very extraordinary moment, and he carried it, with a seriousness. But no feeling of just being full of himself in some way. Very authentic. But there was authority. He had authority and he took authority. But he also deserved authority and had earned authority. We did a trip around the United States after Jonestown. After that cult that killed themselves in Central America. The parents of a lot of our people were very fearful that we were a cult and what that might result in. So we went on a kind of appeasement pilgrimage to meet the parents of our members all around the country. I know we were in North Dakota, and to this day I keep saying to myself that we were in Minot, North Dakota, like one of the most abysmal coal places on earth. One of our members' parents owned, I think, a big farm or maybe a farm machinery company. I don't remember which, but he told us the ditty, "Why not Minot? Reason's the reason." So that's somehow that stayed with me as part of my Zen heritage. But we went around the country, and we ended up in New York. We were going to do a big meeting with Trungpa and a lecture in New York City. And we had just published the book, Hazy Moon of Enlightenment. So we get there, we're going to give the talk on Hazy Moon of Enlightenment, and this big banner's up that Trungpa will give a talk, The Blazing Sun of Enlightenment. Trungpa the Trickster. So anyway, we're there with, my grandparents were away in Europe. So they told me you can stay at the apartment, but don't have anybody there. But so I have Bernie there, I have Maizumi there, and my grandparents, of course, come back a day early. And not only are all of them there in my grandparents' apartment staying there, but Orlovsky and oh my goodness, my mind's going blank. The poet Ginsberg, Allen Ginsberg, are getting drunk in my grandparents' apartment with Maizumi. And it was a raucous scene, but I don't know, they really rolled with it and were very nice. They must have been exhausted. My grandfather's last comment was, I never am going to walk up the steps of another Catholic church in my life. They've been in Italy touring. Anyway, I miss the seriousness and faith in Zen that was so prevalent at that time. It is so hard to instill the feelings of faith in this practice in our students. So this was a wonderful chance. I thought there was going to be a bunch of kids here that were new Zen peacemakers that we were supposed to inspire. But anyway, thank you very much for your time and attention.
Wonderful, thank you, Genki. That was I'm so glad we're recording this. That was wonderful. We have some time here if we'd like to use it. I think we can open up if folks have questions or comments. And I know there are people. We're talking about. Enkyo, thank you for coming. Nice to see you. Bye bye. We're talking about Bernie at Zen Center of LA, and not to exclude anyone, because I think we'll have time for other kinds of questions. But if there are others who were there also who might like to share, that would be wonderful. Or others who had known Bernie for a very long time. And you're among friends here, so relax and feel comfortable, and go ahead and step into it. And I think I can see everyone, so just go ahead and wave your hand and unmute, and you can speak. And don't make me call on you.
Genki reminded me that, it was a very serious place. And I think I love that about ZCLA. And I think that's a great foundation. But at the same time, I think one of Maizumi's wisdom was that Zen is going to change in our country. And it's going to change with each successor, just like it did going from India to China to Japan. And Bernie certainly blew out all the boundaries of that. His visions and his way of actualizing the Dharma were totally different than what Maizumi would have done. And I think that is his great legacy. I remember going to when they first moved, and Genpo and I visiting when we were living in Maine, and we went to visit the place in New York, and it was just different, but it was okay because it was his manifestation. And I think it's probably going to change regularly with each person.
Thank you, Brenda. Thank you. And Seisen, you spoke before, but if should you want to add more too, that's okay. There's no limit here. So, anyone else like to share a comment, or if anyone has a question too, that's all right. Gail Nicholson.
Hello. I have a question for those of you who have spoke, and this has just been so rich, so helpful for me. I'm curious about the process of people becoming more involved in social service. So I was curious if you had anything to say about what motivated that or how that happened.
I can speak to that, and I know Genki knows this too. Bernie actually had a very big opening, and usually we don't talk about openings, and I never heard him really address his initial spiritual opening, but he had a very big opening, and it was I can't remember it exactly, but it was something along all the suffering people in the world telling him, this is what you have to do. But it was definitely a big shift, and it happened very quickly. I was at ZCLA when he came back and told everyone about that. And yeah, so the part of the three tenets in terms of loving action, he realized was the thing that he wanted to devote his life to. And that's when they had the first bearing witness in Washington, D.C., I think, and stuff. But yeah, it was as I recall, it was like what we think of a spiritual awakening, that instantaneously you see the oneness of everyone. He saw that his mission was to serve others and to help suffering. That kind of in Zen, you can get into a place of the best, all I have to do, not all I have to do, but the best thing to do is practice for peace. And if I find peace within, then that will influence everything. And I think it's quite dramatic in terms of Bernie's vision, that he's saying, no, that's good that you see the peace within. That's part of it, to see the oneness of all things and to find peace within yourself. But we have to do something. We can't just sit on that. So yeah, for him, it was very instantaneous. And Maizumi Roshi actually was not a big social action guy. He kind of, he and Aiken Roshi would have arguments about it, friendly arguments, but arguments about it. Maizumi Roshi saw, just if you sit, that's what we do to change the world. And for Bernie, it was a big shift, and I'm seeing it, and Peacemaker Order is manifesting that. I'm seeing it as what particularly makes Bernie's lineage stand out. The emphasis on social action, the essentialness of doing what we can to help others. I have a great story. I'll tell it. It's a little later on, but at Mountain Center, this was after Roshi had died, and he was there to support Bernie, to support Tension and me, keeping on with Mountain Center. And he gave a talk, including loving action. And then we walked to the Zendo, and on the way, it was very hot, and a woman fainted. And everybody went and got her and picked her up and took her, wherever. And then in the questions and answers, somebody said, but I can't do what you're doing. I feel so bad because I'm not doing enough to help others. And Bernie said, well, what did you do when that woman fell down? You didn't walk past her, you stopped and helped her. And that's what each of us should be doing as our vow, as peacemakers, to where we can. If we can give a hungry person a sandwich, or pick up some trash, just to see that action is part of our vow of sitting. Thanks for the question. That's a great question.
Thanks, Jason. Yeah, thank you, Gail, for sure. Ken, Roshi Ken, I saw you put your hand up a little bit earlier. Do you want to unmute?
Thank you. I just really wanted to say thank you to people who shared these stories. As someone who's never been to ZCLA, and I've been thinking I should make a pilgrimage. And now hearing this, I think probably the ZCLA that I want to make the pilgrimage to, though, maybe doesn't exist anymore. I miss that boat. That's part of what I'm living with right at the moment. Thank you.
Thanks, Ken.
You got to make that ZCLA.
And I'll say it does exist there. It's different now, thank God. Thank God. Oh my Lord. I mean, my students will say, oh, I wish I could be there. I'm so glad I'm not there anymore. Sex and drugs and rock and roll and Seisen. But the core of that vision, I mean, it's just amazing what's happening at ZCLA now. And it's really worthwhile going there to see how powerful the practice is and how that vision really is continuing of community practice, living together in harmony. And it's working a little better now.
Well, I do regret that what is being remembered so often of Mayuzumi is maybe an exaggerated sense of party. He worked very hard on documents and translations and his talks in English, and just look at the powerful successors and successors of successors, and those of us who dedicated our lives to this in his spirit. He did infuse Bernie and me and others. Even drinking with him was very focused and like Dharma combat. You weren't just sloppy or laying around. You were sitting in, anyway, it was like Dharma combat. Certainly there was a lot of damage done, and there's a lot of recompense from that, but it really was not just sex, drugs, and rock and roll. It was really making a foundation and trying to stay human. He wanted us not to be marionettes, not to just be bureaucrats, not to be formal. He had an incredible humanity. He would really weep with people when they wept. He was very sensitive, and his body was fluid. I don't know, I sometimes call it animal energy, other times liquid energy. But that spirit is here. This is why we're here today, because of Mayuzumi's energy and Bernie's energy. So don't underestimate it, please. Thank you.
Thank you, Genki.
I would like to say Mayuzumi is my root teacher. I've sat with many, many teachers. I've sat with teachers in Mexico City, in New York, but Mayuzumi is really my root teacher. And I have to say, I went to his 20th, it was a 20th anniversary. It was in Holland, and it was the anniversary of his death, and Junpa was still alive. Junpa led it, and I looked around, and first of all, it was amazing because there was people from all over the world, and so I wanted to say about what Genki's saying about he really influenced he did what he wanted to do, even though, and I feel now that his life was way too short, and yeah, there was a lot of craziness, no question. But at the same time, I saw all these teachers from literally all over the world that would not have been teachers were Mayuzumi had not left Japan and had not started ZCLA. And it was tremendous to see and to feel. And Akio was there at the time. And so there was a lot of pain, like you say, Genki, I agree. And at the same time, a lot of people chose to drink with Maizumi because when he drank, Genpo would say this, and I think it's true. And I'm not a drinker, so I went to one of those situations, but Maizumi told what he was really feeling when he got drunk with his other students. And I remember that situation with Daishin when we were in Boulder, and it was not pretty, as you said, but he told the truth then and dropped his Japanese face. It was a different face he put on, and he would, not always, but he would. And so a lot of the senior students wanted to drink with Maizumi because they felt he really told the truth then.
Yeah, when he was drinking, culturally, he could really say things. He was allowed culturally to speak his mind, things he would never say ordinarily. For a while, I was giving him, when I was his Chisha, I was giving him both orange juice and coffee. Orange juice and tea. He didn't drink coffee, but it was too much. And he wouldn't tell me that. As his Chisha, he wouldn't tell me a criticism. I heard it through Bernie. There was such cultural subtleties that we were living with, and he himself was in this barbaric nation with no manners and craziness, and bored a lot of the time. I mean, we were beginners just buying Zen myths, not knowing, what was mythology and what was truth. Thank God for the wonderful scholars who spent their lives teasing this out and sharing it with us so we could understand more. But yes, his drinking allowed him to speak more directly to us, but it was not always pretty. You realize you didn't necessarily want to know what he thought of you.
I'm just wondering if Kiyoshin, I saw her face a couple of times, if she wants to say something, because she was around ZCLA at that time. Maybe not.
I was really around Roshi more at Mountain Center and in Idlewild, and somewhat at ZCLA, and Bernie as well, not at ZCLA but at Mountain Center. But I would emphasize, I mean, Seisen is my teacher, but Brenda, I agree, and we met many, many years ago in Oregon. It's really a pleasure to see you. I would totally agree about, seeing Maizumi as my root teacher as well. No disrespect to Seisen. And my experience of his, I always felt like there were certain people that had fairy dust sprinkled on them. And my experience was that I thought that my husband at the time was one of those people with fairy dust, because Maizumi was very fond of him. And I did not think I was one of the people with fairy dust. And I remember one time being just so overwrought with pushing myself so much at Mountain Center and Assishin, probably during Ongo, that I was just beside myself. And Maizumi Roshi was so kind. And I remember him, I thought that he was just saying to me, "You're fine." And I thought it was compensatory, like patting me on the head, like, you don't really have the fairy test, but you're really okay. And it wasn't that. And it's just taken me a super, super long time to figure that out. But I experienced mostly, and I had the opportunity living in Idlewild, and when he would come home to be with his family, I got to go over to his house on a weekly basis once I started doing koan study. And I remember one time, and then I'll stop. Seisen, you shouldn't have gotten me going. I remember one time going up the stairs to his study, and he was laying down with his head on his afu. And then he like was startled that I came in the room, and he was like apologizing to me that he was taking a break. I don't think he hardly ever took a break, really, ever. So thank you for giving me the opportunity to bring my voice in the room, and just feeling super grateful. And I feel incredibly grateful that just my life experience was such that I actually got to participate in a lot of these times. And it's really, really, I feel incredibly grateful that I've gotten to be part of this lineage for actually now 40 years. So thank you all. Thank you, Seisen. I'll stop.
Thank you. Thank you. We have a few more minutes. If anybody would like to share a bit more about Bernie. And if not, we certainly can bring this to a close. I'll wait just another part of a minute if someone's inspired. Gail, hi. It's okay to go twice.
Excuse me. I was just curious. I had another question. I was curious about the decision to move to New York, like what that was about, if anybody wants to respond to that.
Thanks for that. That's a good historical note, right?
The decision, we had actually gone earlier. That trip that we took around the country, Genpo and Dido, Bernie and I. In New York, we also met Lex Hickson, who was a radio commentator who interviewed people, gurus of all kinds, spiritual people. He had a show on WBAI. And Lex was a very wealthy son of a diplomat in a wealthy family, and a real figure in New York in the counterculture movement. Gorgeous man, very tall and beautiful features and long blonde hair. And his show really was a magnet in New York for spiritual people. Everybody would tune in every week to listen, and Bernie was on the show. And so we got a lot of response to people who were interested in Zen and an alternative to then the reigning Zen retrobate in New York, Edo Roshi, who had really destroyed a Sangha. And some of Edo Roshi's students had come, like Peter Matheson, had come out to practice with us, leaving Edo Roshi. So the bed was kind of laid, and in a way, ZCLA was bursting at the seams with seniors that were needing to have more room. And Bernie wanted more room to do his own thing. And he definitely was ready to leave. And Genpo was ready to take over. So that was the groundwork. We found a place to be, and we're very excited, made a few trips out there. Then we came out with in a car van with a big moving truck that we were driving in a heavy snowstorm, and expected a throng of people to meet us, and no one met us. And so from there on, it was a climb uphill. It wasn't quite as easy as we thought it was going to be.
Is that what you were looking for, Gail? Did that help?
Yeah, that was great. Thank you. Curious.
I One of Bernie's points of emphasis and practice was having meals together. It's something that's hard to replace in this medium we're in now. But one of the reasons I feel so close to Genki is that maybe the last time we saw each other, we were cooking a turkey together in Montague. It was a bucket of laughs. And I just want to say, from that experience and others, Genki, I feel so close to you. And I'm really happy to see you today and hear you today. And want to thank you for having such a generous recounting of the whole experience. It means a lot to me. Thanks.
You mean a lot to all of us. You've been our historian and visual historian and great companion. I don't know how you maintain such a fabulous spirit.
Well, actually, the other word that meant a lot today was the mention of community, which is certainly true. We all know in these Zen communities, but Ara and I are now in a Canadian fishing island. It's another part of my life. And it's like a couple thousand people here, and it's a community. We, we love each other and hate each other, but we know each other and we bump into each other. And it's really meaningful, and it's obviously so important in this world. But my little thought was that social action, living in community is its own social action. It doesn't take any effort, and we're hardly even aware of it. It just happens. And that we need more of it.
For those that may not know, Peter Cuckoo Cunningham is a beautiful photographer. And Cuckoo, I think this is a little bit shameless, but when we first met 3.5 years ago in New York City, you immediately made me president of the Order of Disorder, and I was very appreciative of that. So if you'd like to just mention your website where your photography is, I think that's okay. If you'd like to put it into the chat, I refer everyone to Peter's photography. It's just lovely, and it's, as Genki said, Cuckoo's been an archivist for the lineage for quite some time. So.
Yeah, well, Jeff, you shouldn't feel that special, because we were trying to give away that job as president of the Order to everybody who would coming along.
Well, I stumbled into it like a fool, so.
Well done. Okay, I'll do that.
Anyone else here? We have a couple more minutes. This has been delightful. Not seeing any hands. Once again, Roshi Ken was the instigator of this event, and Ken, would you like to, before we close, is there anything you'd like to say to just to wrap us up?
Yeah, I guess, only just remembering this is, in 2 weeks, it'll be 5 years since Bernie passed. I'm grateful to Zen peacemakers for keeping the memory of Bernie and Jishu and the founding of the Zen peacemakers alive. Just want to echo, I mean, it's particularly, what Peter said, it's really wonderful, Genki, to have you here. That shortly before she passed, Jishu asked me to see what I could do about healing Bernie's jagged karma. Because he left, with all the wonderful stuff that he did, he left a lot of hurt in his wake, and it was wonderful to hear you talk, Genki, and to be in this room. That I mean, I never, you know, I didn't. I'm going to get emotional, but I didn't. I didn't know either Bernie or Genki in the old days, and but I was there when Genki returned, and you know, it really was Genki, that metaphor. It was like the prodigal son for Bernie. It's like it was like I'd never seen Bernie happier than, and it was such a roller coaster with him, and sometimes there was so much sadness. But it was a wonderful trip, and I'm so glad everybody could be here.
Thank you, Ken. Thank you so much. Well, I think we can go ahead and sign off. But I don't want to do so without once again just really very sincerely thanking Seisen and Genki for being our guests today and sharing so warmly your recollections and stories, and then for everyone else for spending this time together. And do come again in 2 weeks. We'll be looking into Bernie the Clown. So come and see us same time, same Zoom link. You can use the same one again. And with that, we'll say goodbye and thank you all. Enjoy your weekend.